My name is Sibyl Hartwell, 70 years old this spring. I've lived in Savannah long enough to know the difference between manners and manipulation. And the woman standing on my porch that morning had only one of the two. The sun was still climbing past the oaks, cutting through the lace curtains when the doorbell rang. I was watering the ivy Jonas planted the year before he passed, humming under my breath, the hose coiled neatly at my feet. When I opened the door, my daughter-in-law, Callista Dre, was there, her perfume sharper than the air. Behind her stood two people I'd never met, an older couple with tape measures dangling from their wrists and polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Morning, Sibyl," Callista said brightly, stepping halfway into my foyer before I invited her. "I've been thinking about your place. It's perfect for my parents. They move tomorrow." The words were delivered like a compliment, wrapped in cheerfulness that felt rehearsed. I noticed how she ran her eyes along the crown molding, already planning where the furniture would go. The man, her father, I assumed was jotting numbers into a small notepad, murmuring something about dimensions. For a moment, I simply stood there, fingers curled around the edge of the door. After 30 years in this house, I'd seen storms, funerals, even a hurricane that peeled shingles from the roof, but nothing quite as invasive as that sentence. Callista turned back to me, smiling with the satisfaction of someone who had already won. "We'll make sure you're settled somewhere nice. I've looked at a retirement community across town, independent living. Very convenient." Her mother nodded, still measuring the hallway with her eyes. I let her finish. Then I reached for the dish towel hanging by the door and folded it once, slowly. "That's thoughtful of you, dear," I said. "Then I suppose I'd better prepare." She took it as agreement, all sunshine and confidence, and began describing paint colors. I listened until their car pulled away, their voices fading down the live oak street. The ivy at my feet trembled from a passing breeze. Inside, the light shifted across the hardwood floors, warm and steady. I set the watering can on the counter and opened the drawer where I kept the old house deed. The paper smelled faintly of dust and ink, proof that preparation could start long before anyone noticed. The house had always known how to stand its ground. Jonas built it in 1927, long before we met. But his hands lingered in every joint and beam. The front porch still creaked in the same rhythm he used to whistle while sanding the railings. The floors held the kind of quiet that came from being walked on by people who loved, argued, and forgave each other under the same roof. I ran my hand along the hallway trim, the varnish smooth beneath my palm. This wasn't just a house, it was a spine that had carried generations upright. I'd hosted neighborhood reading nights here for nearly 20 years, teaching children how to pronounce words like perseverance and integrity. Some of them came back years later, taller and surer, to tell me those lessons had followed them into adulthood. In the kitchen, sunlight struck the counter Jonas had carved himself from reclaimed pine. The mortgage was down to its final payments. Taxes were always paid on time. I kept folders labeled for everything utilities, insurance, maintenance. I wasn't careless or senile. As Callista's tone had implied, I was simply steady. And steadiness is something people mistake for weakness when they've never needed to rely on it. The phone rang just as I finished folding the last dish towel. Thain's name flashed across the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Hey, Mom," he began, his voice thick with a kind of nervous politeness that wasn't his own. "Callista told me she dropped by. Don't take it the wrong way. It's just this house is big, and you've got all that upkeep. It's practical to think ahead. Practical." That was Callista's favorite word lately. "I've managed for quite some time," I said softly. "Your father and I built this place to last. I know. But, Mom, her parents need somewhere stable. Their lease ends next month." His phrasing told me everything. This wasn't concern, it was coordination. A polite ambush dressed as family planning. When we hung up, I stood for a while, letting the house breathe around me. The late morning light fell across Jonas's old carpenter bench by the back window. I brushed the dust from its surface and whispered to the air, almost like a promise. "We're not done yet, old friend." By mid-afternoon, the fear that had prickled behind my ribs all morning had hardened into something steadier. I'd spent my life teaching children that knowledge is armor. Now it was time to take my own advice. The office of Delphine Caro sat on the corner of Whitaker and Jones, tucked between a cafe and a florist that always smelled faintly of lilies. Delphine had been Jonas's attorney years ago when he updated his will. She greeted me with that same calm, methodical presence, half logic, half empathy. "What's happened?" "Sibyl," she asked. Guiding me to a chair, I told her everything: the unannounced visit, the measuring tape, the phrase "they move tomorrow." My words came out even, not trembling. Delphine listened without interruption, her pen resting idle on a legal pad until I finished. Then she nodded once. "We can handle this," she said. "You don't need to raise your voice when the law can speak for you." Together, we built a quiet fortress of paper. A living trust, irrevocable, naming me trustee and occupant for life. Delphine prepared a reserved life estate clause that locked the property to my name until my last day. Then came the no trespass notice. Specific and surgical Callista Dre, Marek Dre, and Irina Dre prohibited from entering the premises without my written consent. She filed a certification of trust with the county that same afternoon, her assistant stamping the documents in blue ink. Each sheet sounded like a door closing softly, but firmly. When we finished, she looked at me over her glasses. "You'll want to change the locks and add cameras," she said. "Not paranoia documentation." I nodded. The idea of a camera felt foreign, but so had betrayal. That evening, a locksmith replaced the brass fixtures Jonas had chosen decades ago. The new keys felt lighter, sharper in my hand. At the kitchen table, I unfolded a sheet of thick stationery and began writing in my own deliberate hand. "Welcome to a home that runs on consent," I wrote. "May you always know the difference between being invited and being entitled." The ink dried slowly in the lamplight. When I placed the note inside an envelope, the air around me felt different, still fragile, but guarded now, like a house that had just remembered its own spine. By the next evening, the street had changed its temperature. Not the air exactly, the air in Savannah always carried that faint, salt, thick warmth, but something subtler. Conversations paused when I stepped outside to check the mail. Curtains moved a second too late. Callista had always known how to work an audience. By noon, she'd phoned 3 neighbors to check on me, sprinkling concern like sugar over poison. I heard from Mrs. Lander across the street that Callista was telling people I'd had some lapses and might need assistance. It didn't take long for the concern to mutate into pity. And pity is the first draft of dispossession. At 4, the phone rang again. A bright male voice introduced himself as Stellan Mott, a local realtor specializing in retirement housing transitions. His tone was syrupy, but his words were knife clean. "Mrs. Hartwell, I heard you might be interested in exploring safer options, independent living, perhaps assisted, depending on your needs." "My only need right now," I said, "is for supper and quiet." He chuckled, pretending not to feel the edge. "Of course, ma'am. Just so you know, properties in your area are in high demand. If you'd ever like a discreet conversation," I ended the call before the sentence could finish. Then I opened my notebook and wrote 4:17 p.m. Stellan Mott. Unsolicited call regarding sale. Source rumor circulation. Documentation had become my language of self-defense. As twilight deepened, I stood at the front window, watching the soft flicker of porch lights coming alive one by one. This street had seen me plant azaleas, patch shingles, teach spelling on the porch swing, but tonight it felt like neutral ground. I made 2 phone calls of my own. Lowell Greaves, the HOA president, had always respected Jonas's craftsmanship. When I told him I needed a witness tomorrow morning just in case of confusion, he agreed immediately. The second call went to Deputy Keir Dalton, a man with a patient voice and a reputation for fairness. He promised to stop by on his morning patrol later. I set 4 teacups on the dining table, mine, Callista's, Lowell's, and the deputy's. The porcelain glowed pale under the lamplight. I didn't know who would drink from them, but the act steadied me. The house seemed to breathe again, its walls listening, ready for whatever came with the dawn. Thain arrived just after sunset, his headlights sweeping across the porch before cutting out. Through the window, I saw him sit in the car for a long moment, shoulders bowed, hands gripping the steering wheel. When he finally came in, he carried that same hesitant air as if stepping into a place that no longer belonged entirely to him. "Callista's upset," he began, not meeting my eyes. "She says you've been talking to lawyers." I motioned toward the kitchen. "Tea." He shook his head. "Mom, this is all getting out of hand. Her parents don't mean harm. They just need somewhere safe. It's only fair." The word landed between us like a dull thud. Fair. It was what people said when they wanted to take something gently. So it didn't sound like taking. I sat down at the table where the envelope still rested from the night before. "Fairness," I said slowly, "isn't dividing walls. It's honoring who built them." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're making this harder than it has to be." I studied him in the lamplight, the same light that once shone on him doing homework, scowling at math problems, grinning when he finally understood. That boy still lived somewhere inside the man, though he was quieter now, dulled by compromise and the wish to please everyone. "Your father put every beam in this place with his hands," I said, "and I filled it with years of work and care. That doesn't make me selfish, it makes me its keeper." Thain's eyes flicked toward the folder on the table. "What's that?" I slid it toward him. The label, printed in steady black ink, read, "By invitation only." Inside were copies of the trust, the no trespass order, and the notice filed with the county. "It's just paperwork," I said. "Clarity can save families more pain than argument ever could." He flipped through the pages, color draining from his face. "You're serious?" "I am," I said, "but I still love you, Thain. That part isn't negotiable." He closed the folder carefully, as though afraid of what it contained, then stood to leave. The house was silent except for the soft click of the door behind him. I sat a while longer, tracing the grain of the table where his father once hammered the first nail, feeling both the ache of motherhood and the steadiness of the wood beneath my hands. The morning bloomed too bright for what it carried. Sunlight spilled through the magnolia branches, the air thick with the sweetness of azaleas. I had set the table for tea before dawn, 4 cups, a plate of lemon biscuits, and the pale envelope waiting in its place of honor beside the sugar bowl. At 8:30, I heard the first rumble. A moving truck lumbered down the narrow street, its wheels grinding against the curb as it stopped in front of my house. A minute later, Callista's car pulled up behind it. She stepped out in heels far too high for cobblestones, her confidence shining like lacquer. Her parents followed, both dressed in traveling clothes, the sort meant for permanent relocations. I opened the front door before she could ring the bell. "Good morning, dear," I said, the same way I might greet any guest. "Oh, you're ready?" Wonderful Callista clapped once, scanning the porch as though taking inventory. "The movers will handle everything. We'll keep your room cozy until you settle in at Brookhaven." Behind her, 2 men began unloading boxes marked kitchen and linen, The scene had the surreal calm of a play already rehearsed. Down the sidewalk, Lowell Greaves stood with his clipboard, pretending to check the HOA flower beds, but keeping a watchful eye. Deputy Keir Dalton, in uniform, parked his patrol car 2 houses down and approached slowly, his pace deliberate. "Callista," I said softly, "before anyone carries anything in, may I see a delivery order?" She blinked, confused. "A what?" "Paperwork," I explained. "I just like to know whose name is on the line." The movers paused, exchanging uncertain looks. Callista laughed, a quick, brittle sound. "Mother Sibyl, please, let's not make this awkward." I smiled back. "Then you might want to read this first." I held out the cream-colored envelope. The sunlight caught the raised ink of my initials SH on the flap. Callista hesitated, then took it, eyes narrowing slightly. Her father's hand hovered over a box handle. Her mother looked toward the deputy as if realizing, for the first time, that he was watching. The street fell into a hush so complete that even the cicadas seemed to hold their breath. I poured myself a cup of tea, steady hands, calm voice, the weight of my years and every lesson I'd ever taught standing quietly behind me. Callista tore the envelope open with the briskness of someone who expected a formality. The first page slipped free, thick parchment, stamped in blue by the Chatham County clerk. The title line gleamed under the morning light. Hartwell Living Trust. Irrevocable with reserved life estate. Her eyes skimmed it without understanding, then moved to the second page, no trespass notice, listing 3 names in tidy black print: Callista Dre, Marek Dre, Irena Dre. Her laugh cracked. Too sharp to sound natural. This must be some misunderstanding. I kept my hands folded on my lap. "It's quite clear," I said. "You'll find it's already on record." Marek reached for the paper, his tan face paling as he scanned the notarized signatures and county seal, his lips pressed together. "Callista," he murmured. "This is legal. She's the trustee. Dad, it's fine. She insisted," though her voice wavered. "It's just paperwork to scare us." But then came the final sheet, the affidavit of ownership, notarized in black ink, followed by a single card. On it, my handwriting. "You are not villains of my story, but you don't get to write it." The silence that followed was a living thing. Irena's fingers tightened around her handbag. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said softly, "we didn't mean to intrude. We were told everything was arranged." "I'm sure you were," I replied. "You're not at fault for believing family." At the edge of the porch, one of the movers cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said to Callista, "company policy says we can't unload without written authorization from the legal owner." Lowell, standing nearby, nodded toward the open pages. "And she's right there in black and white." Callista's smirk faltered, replaced by the brittle stillness of someone cornered by truth. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. Deputy Dalton stepped forward, his tone polite but final. "Mrs. Dre, the homeowner has exercised her rights properly. I suggest you collect your property and clear the lane." Callista looked around the neighbors on porches, her parents avoiding her gaze, the movers waiting. For the first time, she seemed to see the scene from the outside, a performance collapsing under daylight. I lifted my teacup and met her eyes. "Thank you for coming, dear. You've reminded me how important preparation can be." Her face stiffened, and without another word, she turned toward the steps. The truck doors slammed shut, the sound echoing like a curtain falling on the wrong act. The heat rose off the pavement in visible shimmers, that heavy Savannah noon when even the birds seemed to pause. Callista's heels clicked hard against the porch planks as she turned back to me, her face flushed with a mix of fury and disbelief. "You planned this," she hissed. "All of it. The lawyer, the deputy, that ridiculous letter. You've made me look like a fool in front of everyone." I met her eyes evenly. "No, Callista. You did that yourself." Her mouth opened for another retort, but Lowell Greaves stepped forward, a thick folder tucked beneath his arm. "Mrs. Dre," he said, tone neutral, but edged with civic authority. "Before you go on, I think you should see this." He pulled out a single page. The HOA complaint that had arrived the previous week, complete with my name, but not my handwriting. "You filed this, didn't you?" he asked, claiming Mrs. Hartwell was neglecting property upkeep. Callista blinked. She told me to." "No," Lowell said quietly. "I spoke with the association clerk. The signature was forged. That's a serious matter." The deputy's voice followed, firm and unhurried. "Forgery on an HOA document can qualify as a misdemeanor under state law. You may want to consult an attorney before you say more." For a moment, nobody breathed. Even the movers pretended to adjust straps just to stay out of sight. Then a car door slammed down the street. Thain hurried up the walk, his tie loosened, face pale from heat and worry. "What's going on?" he asked. "Callista." "What did you do?" "She ambushed me," Callista snapped, gesturing at me, her tone unraveling. "She set this up to humiliate us." Thain looked from her to the deputy, to the papers Lowell still held. Understanding came slowly but completely. "You forged her name?" he asked, voice low, "after everything she's done for us." Callista's reply died on her lips. Her parents stood behind her, silent, already shifting toward the truck. "I think we should leave," Irina murmured, touching her daughter's arm. Marek nodded once, grim and gray around the edges. Callista turned away, words spent. Thain lingered for a beat longer, shame hollowing his features. "Mom," he began. I shook my head gently. "Love is welcome here," I said. "Just not entitlement." He bowed his head and followed his wife down the path, the sound of the truck engine filling the silence their departure left behind. 3 weeks later, the street had returned to its usual rhythm, the hum of cicadas, the faint creak of porch swings, and the smell of wisteria climbing the fences again. The house felt lighter now, as though the air itself had exhaled. That Saturday, I set out the folding chairs for the neighborhood reading circle, the one I'd paused during all the commotion. The porch boards, recently scrubbed, glowed beneath the late afternoon sun. Beside the front door, a new brass plaque caught the light. By invitation, not assumption, I'd chosen the words carefully. They weren't about winning. They were about balance, permission, and peace, sharing the same space. The first guests arrived with the soft murmur of familiar voices. Mrs. Lander brought her blueberry muffins, and 2 children from next door carried a stack of picture books. We read aloud until the light grew gold and thin. Laughter came easier this time, moving through the air like it used to. When the circle ended and chairs were stacked neatly against the railing, Delphine Caro stopped by, holding a white box tied with twine. "Peace offering," she said. "Apricot pastries. You've had enough paperwork. You deserve something sweet." I smiled and poured her tea. "You gave me the kind of sweetness that lasts longer," I told her. She only shrugged, modest as always, and sat for a moment beneath the hanging fern, content to listen to the quiet. A little later, I heard footsteps on the walkway, slow, uncertain. Thain stood at the gate, holding 2 paper bags of groceries. His eyes searched my face before his voice did. "I brought a few things," he said softly, "and I thought maybe I could fix the loose porch rail. Dad would have hated seeing it wobble." I studied him for a breath, then stepped aside and opened the screen door. "If you're here by invitation," I said. "Always." He nodded, setting the bags down carefully, his shoulders easing for the first time in weeks. The sun dipped low, washing the yard in amber. When he went to fetch the hammer from Jonas's old bench, I reached for a cloth and polished the brass plaque beside the door. The letters gleamed warm and steady, catching the last thread of light as evening settled through the Spanish moss.